All right, thank you for joining Literally Alive. My name is Robert Diamante. Tonight we have a very special show. Not only are we airing on Tuesday night, but we have two exciting guests, novelist Agnes Bushell and poet essayist Annaliese Jakimides. They will be discussing carrying truth on the page in fiction and nonfiction. Agnes Bushell has written fiction all her life. She was born in Queens, New York, went to college in Chicago, moved to Maine inadvertently in 1970, and has lived in Portland pretty much ever since. She is one of the founders of Littoral Books and its editorial director. Monkey is her latest novel. Welcome, Agnes.
Thanks, Robert.
Annaliese Jakimides is a writer and mixed media artist. Her work has been cited in national competitions, including by former Maine Poet Laureate Baron Wormser and Betsy Scholl, and by Reginald Dwayne Betts, recipient of the American Book Award and the NAACP Image Award. Her essay, Silver Lining, was selected as one of 40 from a field of more than 8,000 submissions to be broadcast on NPR's This I Believe, and included in both its anthology and CD recording. She is a co-writer of the musical Love Affair, which premieres this summer. She grew up in inner city Boston and raised a family on 40 plus acres in northern Maine, growing almost all their food and pumping water by hand. She has published poetry and prose in many journals, magazines, and anthologies, including the Littoral Books titles, A Dangerous New World, Maine Voices on the Climate Crisis, Enough, Poems of Resistance and Protest, and Wait, Poems from the Pandemic. Her most recent anthologized work includes Fiction in the Memory Palace and Nonfiction in Breaking Bread, Essays from New England on Food, Hunger, and Family. The winner of 2 Maine Literary Awards and Rivers of Ink, Literary Reflections on the Penobscot, Jakimides has worked with national environmental justice organizations, international arts groups, and people in prisons and recovery centers, all through a literary lens. She has been a member of MWPA's Community Advisory Board since its inception and currently lives in an apartment in a small city next to a library. Welcome, Annaliese.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Well, you're welcome. Would you both, I'm so excited about tonight's show. Would you both explain how this came about?
Sure. I'll start and give you a little bit of background there, and then we'll go on from there, and Agnes will add. I want to say that I'm grateful that Robert came up with the idea of potentially putting us together. And Agnes, thanks so much for inviting me to be here with you in this Literally Alive conversation. And to all of you for coming. Initially, we didn't have any vision of what Agnes and I together here would even look like. Once we knew we were doing this, I gathered some essays, some old ones and new ones, some published, some unpublished, lumped them into a doc and sent them off to Agnes for her to take a look at and see what she could put together of how this would really work, what it is we wanted to talk about and how we would put this together. She then realized from the page that we'd both lost a grown son and that they showed up on our pages. So once she recognized that, we were on the path. And until I did the math recently, I hadn't realized that they may have left at different ages. My son was 21 and hers was 37, but they were born in the same year, grew up in the same window of time, her Nick in urban southern Maine and my Arik in rural northern. A primary difference between Agnes and me is that she writes fiction. I smatter all around, but have published about 400 personal essays. So we had the fiction and the nonfiction hat, and in emails back and forth, it became clear that we were both intent on telling the truth, writing the truth, bringing our readers into our worlds, wanting them to trust our stories, even though hers was fiction and mine was nonfiction. And so that's what brought us here tonight, reading and discussing, carrying truth on the page in fiction and nonfiction. So I'm going to turn to Agnes so that she can add whatever she wants to add there, and start us off by talking about your work and reading a short section that gets us moving. We'll have three spots, by the way, so people have their heads together when we're reading various things throughout this hour. So thanks, Agnes. I'm so happy to be here with you.
And I'm so happy to be here with you also, Annaliese. And I wanted to say to you, I want to add to what you've said, which is totally true, everything you said. But what you didn't say, and what I'd like to add is, when I was reading through your essays, the essays that you sent to me, I had no idea that you had a son who had died. I didn't know that. I was reading your essays and enjoying them, and then suddenly I came upon one in which Eric appears. And I was stunned by it. I was astonished by it. I was moved by it. I think I probably cried. I mean, it's so powerful, the work that you do. And I also realized that I could never write that. I could never write that. For me, I have to distance myself from my characters, and Nick became, my son's name is Nick. In order to write about him, I had to distance myself. I could never be as forthright as you are in your essays, or I could not expose that grief. I think that that's what you do. You expose the grief, and I could not do that. So what I had to do was I had to distance myself. And the way I did that was, first of all, I moved Nick and everybody that would be connected to him to Russia in the mid-19th century. So that's distance, right? And then I also never, in the book, and I'm talking about Monkey, which is the name of the novel that we're talking about. I never actually allow him this character Nikolai, to appear in the book as a character. He's only remembered by other people. He's seen obliquely. He's seen through people's memories, through dreams that they have, through visions that they have. He appears in a seance, but he's never there. He's the ghost in the book. And I think that those two things were the things that allowed me to write about him. Otherwise, I would never have been able to do it. So I admire what you do greatly. And I think that this is the question that we're going to be hopefully dancing around tonight and talking about. And I hope everyone in the audience, I hope that you'll ask questions about this and contribute, because I think it's an interesting question. The difference between the genres, between writing fiction and nonfiction, and how, especially around something like a death, how those two types of writing can reveal or not reveal things. So what I'm going to read first, this little short thing to begin, it kind of gives an example of that, because this is the scene that takes place in a seance. One of the characters in Monkey is Elena Blavatskaya, who is based on Madame Blavatsky, who was a real person, and a medium and a psychic. And she is giving a seance, and I'll just read this. And then the spirit appeared. He was a young man dressed in a worker's smock, tall and lean, with close-cropped hair, a trimmed beard, cherubic cheeks, and shining dark blue eyes under long lashes and thick brows. He stood quite at ease and looked around at those seated with an expression of ironic amusement. He was holding a sheaf of papers in one hand and a pen in the other. The sight startled Fyodorov. while Margarita, sitting beside Blavatskaya, began trembling violently and pulled herself to her feet. "Nikolai," she cried out in a hoarse and desperate voice. Then, as quickly as she had stood, she sat again, as though all strength had left her body. Svetlana glowered at her across the table. Blavatskaya, however, addressed the apparition. "What is your name, spirit?" "My name? I no longer have a name. I renounced it, as I generally did everything in life." "No, no," Margarita cried out. "You have a name, Nikolai." The materialized spirit turned to her, smiled at her, a sweet, sad smile, and spoke. "Love leaped out in front of us like a murderer in an alley, leaping out of nowhere, and struck us both at once." "Nikolai," she cried again, and this time she began to sob, and tears ran down her cheeks. "Oh, tell me you aren't dead, Nikolai. It can't be true." "It isn't," Blavatskaya said. "What you are seeing is a trick, a projection." "Our medium renounces her own powers," Svetlana said sarcastically. "She calls the spirits of the dead, and when they come..." Fyodorov, now shaking fiercely and feeling his own life coming to an end, cried out, "Oh, Nikolai, my friend." And
Wow.
Annaliese.
Thank you so much for that, Agnes. Thank you for your words about my work, but that I'm so fascinated by the process and moved by, and I think that's what we'll be talking about too tonight, is, you know, how both fiction and nonfiction can bring forth the emotion of truth. It's not just the facts of truth, but the emotion of truth, and how you've transformed your son and held on to him, you know, in this section. And I for a minute, I just want to also say, when you're talking about, you know, distancing yourself in a different kind of way, when you write, or when I write nonfiction in this way, I distance myself with time. I could never write some of the pieces I will read tonight right after or closely after. I mean, there's time that you take where you process that whole story before you can ever, well, you don't even think you're ever going to write it, but before you can write it. So there's that distance for me. I'm reading a short section in this beginning of an unpublished piece that sometimes insists in it, it lives in an essay, and other times something longer. It was really hard to choose what to read for me, the bits from where. There are multiple places that I could draw from, and it was really hard. And one might argue that I'm throwing you sort of into the soup here in the wrong place as I start. But part of the reason I need to read this is to acknowledge that when you lose a child, particularly in this way, Arik chose to leave, you are often shaped by the support around you, even if you can't accept it or see it. Here in this section, I mention a state trooper. We have continued to be in touch over all these years, not closely in touch, but in touch. And please know that as I read this section, the rest of my readings are not from this. And as I said, to remember that there's distance. You have to process this kind of thing before you can ever write it. So here it is. I know I should smell gunpowder and grease, sweat and dirt, but all I smell is your floured fingers in a mound of bread dough. The trooper, his name is Paul Stewart, Trooper Paul Stewart, is standing right outside the door. I can hear him breathing. Well, actually, I don't recognize any of it. Him, the breathing, the kindness. I don't recognize any of it until afterwards, after my two other children, a son, a daughter, come home and go away again to live their lives minus their brother, after the celebration of Arik's life, after people realize there is nothing I can let them do for me, nothing, that all the work is mine, whether that makes sense to them or not. After my world assumes a state of almost catatonic silence, punctuated by 6-hour nightly wailings with Dr. John cranked up to the nines. If someone walked by my apartment door, they would hear wild, blustery blues piano banging, a pounding, gravelly man's voice, not a middle-aged woman coming unhinged. Paul Stewart is the one who called me in the morning to tell me, but what I thought he would be telling me when he said he was a state trooper calling about my ARIC was that my boy was in jail, that he'd stolen a car. Someone had left a message on my phone in the middle of the night about ARIC taking his car, a crazy, pranky thing ARIC would do, take a friend's car without permission, drive like crazy into the blackness of night on inky country roads under sequins of stars, and my boy, just barely a man, squealing tires, anxious for the swell of engine power, snaking down his arms, his hands clenching the wheel. He would be singing. If I had been there, I would have been able to smell his breath, a blend of danger and forgetfulness. I am sure on that last night, he would probably have forgotten to brush his teeth.
And you know, Annaliese, that is one of the essays that I remember reading that you sent me that it took my breath away. I mean, we're talking about truth telling in writing, and I guess the question to be formulated that we're going to be talking about is fiction more true or less true than nonfiction, or are they both true in their own way? Do they both, as you put it, express the emotion around something that, and the emotion itself is the truth? I wouldn't, I don't want to make any truth claims for fiction or for the novel. I mean, I'm thinking specifically about telling the truth about these two boys, these two men who died, and our response to that. I think that that question is the one that I keep thinking about. Like, am I really telling the truth about Nick? I don't, compared to what you say about Eric, I don't think so. I think that what I did was I made up a story about it. And I think this is something that, I hope that we can talk about. I mean, what do you think about this, Annaliese?
Well, I think that, truth is, it's not just facts, okay? I would say that nonfiction, the world I'm living in there is more factual, but truth is like more of it can be, if it works in both arenas, in both genres, it's an emotional truth. And I think that can come in both instances. That's how I perceive it. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. I mean, in both genres, you get an emotional sense of what is the real truth here. So it's important, I think it's important to note that while the reader of any given story might have a subjective experience of its truthfulness, the only control we have as the writer is over our intention. Our intention and how we shape that intention on the page. So I think that that's sort of what we're talking about here. My intention is to tell the truth about my boy, my intention when I write anything is to tell the truth about all of it. And sometimes there are difficult moments, not just the event of his loss, but the complexity of a human being that shows up on the page. But you can't reject that. And I think that kind of thing is also what you're mining, or I think you're mining. You can speak to that, Agnes, whether that comes up for you when you're translating Nick into a different language, I guess is in a way how I see it.
Right. And the other thing that I do that you can't do because you're writing an essay, what I can do as a fiction writer is I can create many points of view so that this one Nikolai can be seen from a multitude of points of view. So in the book, I actually counted the other day, and there are 15 different points of view. I mean, 15 characters that in the book that are either thinking about him or remembering things about him or criticizing him, so that you see the character in the round, sort of. You see how all these different people felt about him, what they thought about him, what they expected from him. And I think that that's something that fiction writers can do. They can get that nuance, that feeling of the complexity of things, because this one person can be seen from so many vantage points.
And for me, you're right. You're right. I mean, that's a fabulous thing to point out, because when you're writing in the way that I'm writing, it's all funneling through my viewpoint. Even if it's somebody else's opinion of him, it's funneling through my lens. And that is something that, as a writer of this kind of personal nonfiction, you're acutely aware of, because you don't want to slant things. You want them to have integrity. And the other thing I want to point out is a friend of mine who's a writer has often said, she's a fiction writer, has often said that what happens in real life, sometimes people can't truly believe on the page as a true story, but you can move it into fiction and change some of the stuff around it, but it's essentially the same story, and the reader can enter it more completely. I don't know whether you've experienced that, but I knew what she was talking about when she was saying that it's easier. So I think it's the emotional truth that we're both, kind of looking at. But I will say this, on some level, I think that writing fiction is easier because you get to make up the whole world, But as a writer, I also find it scarier and harder. Okay, I don't do it. I don't do it because of that. But somehow it seems if I did do it, I could at least make up everything and have control. And with me, I only know what my tools are, what my arcs are, what the details are, and then that's all I have. And I have to make it work.
Shall we read some more?
Sure.
But I hope that the audience, all you guys out there, will please be thinking about questions to ask us, because that would be fun. So the second reading that we decided to do would be the assignment that we had was to read something that was truthful about our sons. And anyone who knew Nick will find that this experience of Nikolai's is truthful. This is told from the point of view of one of his friends, Fyodorov, and he is he's speaking to Elena Blavatsky, this character that's based on Madame Blavatsky. Okay. So they're talking about his this dream that he had, and he says. She says to him, "I had no idea that you lived in a community house." And he says, "Yes, I did. It was a rather odd one. I expect so." Smaller in scale, of course, than Fourier suggested, and not as organized as he might have wished. In fact, it was rather anarchistic. But the idea of living and working together, of sharing everything, of creating a community based on friendship and equality, well, that was Barakov's plan. Barakov is Nikolai. And that's how he came to rent the house on the Viborg side of the river. But he wound up taking in all kinds of strays and ne'er-do-wells, old friends who found him and asked for help, which he gave, of course. And soon the rooms were all filled with drunks and brawlers, and the utopian elements of the house, more or less, fell by the wayside. So now Fyodorov, after saying this, he begins to remember this event that happened, his first meeting with Nikolai. And what I'm not reading is the background to this. The story is that he's at an inn in Moscow. It's late at night. He's been reading. He lost track of time. He goes outside in the dark, and before he knew it, he was surrounded by a gang of thieves who seized hold of him, ran their hands all over him, took things from his pockets, grabbed his small case, struck him on the head, threw him to the ground, and did all these things at once, so that he could not even tell what was happening to him at any given moment, and would have done God knows what else, except that within seconds of the assault, another group of attackers arrived, and poor Fyodorov, though now indeed he would be killed, because these bandits must be even more evil than the first, coming at him with such ferocity, yelling at the top of their lungs, pounding him with their fists. Blows were exchanged, shouts and cries filled the air, men were falling onto the ground. One man in particular, a bearded, broad-shouldered villain, took on one of the first thieves and beat him mercilessly until not only he but all his comrades fled into the night, but not before the new thieves robbed the old ones, not only of all of Fyodorov's possessions, but all of their own as well. Then, breathing hard and rubbing blood from his face, the bearded fighter looked down at Fyodorov, who was crumpled in a heap on the muddy ground, holding his head and trembling in terror, and he laughed. "Well, Your Excellency, what do you say? Can you stand? Give him a hand up, Taras, and give me that bottle. The professor here could probably use a drink, too." Strong arms hauled him to his feet, his hat was restored to him, and his valise and a bottle of vodka was thrust into his hands. "Did you get it all?" someone asked, and then he felt sure he was about to be robbed again, though this time by more gentlemanly thieves. "Let's sort it out inside," the leader said, for the ferocious bearded fighter was clearly the head of this group of brigands. And so they all returned to the inn from whence it turned out the group had come, and sat down at a large table, and one by one the good thieves dropped onto it handfuls of all the objects that had been in Fyodorov's pockets or on his person. "That's everything," Fyodorov said, although he wasn't sure it was, since he had no idea he had carried so much around with him to begin with. Then he stood and bowed and introduced himself. "I am greatly in your debt," he said, hoping he wasn't too much in their debt, as he had very little money to reward them with. And what was his life worth, really? He had heard of a man being rewarded with 50 rubles for pulling a drowning man out of the river. He did not have 50 rubles. No debts involved," said the leader. "We all love a good street fight." Another bottle appeared on the table, its contents immediately poured into glasses, one of which was set before him, and he drank it down, and drank the next one, and the next. They were laughing at the escapade and talking about others of the same kind. Meanwhile, Barakov had taken on a truly piratical appearance, having wrapped a rag around his head to staunch a wound. "I have studied medicine," he said, "and I think you should let me look at your wound. Then, gentlemen, I must try to get some sleep somewhere. We can offer you a bed for the night, and then you can sew me up. I'm sure you do a better job than Voloshin here." Barakov punched his friend on the arm. "He's pretty wicked with a needle and thread. I can show you if you have the stomach for it." Pulling up his sleeve, he showed Fyodorov a long, ugly scar. "So," he continued to tell his story, "they took me to the house on the Viborg side. I sewed up Nikolai's head, and then they gave me a bed in a room on the second floor, and there I stayed for quite some time. The best years of my life I spent in that house, Elena Petrovna, and the joy I felt there with those boys, so full of life, so much sheer fun, it was never the same after he left. It changed entirely." "And he's a good man, you would say?" "Barakov? Yes, a good man, and a loyal one. He has a noble heart, Elena Petrovna, and I would not say that about many men. He never let anyone disrespect me or my work. He always asked me what I was thinking about, and he'd sit and talk to me and listen to me with sincere interest." A writer must listen with interest. "Yes, he told me once that everything he did in his life was research for his book." "He was researching his fellow men?" "Yes, assembling characters and events, though of course he was also taking part in those events. He is a character in his own book."
Yeah, Agnes, it occurs to me, when you started writing Monkey, did you know that Nick would be in it, or did he just show up?
Oh, it was supposed to be always a book.
Planned it, right? Okay. So that's always interesting to me, how things come about, what the genesis is of how something comes about. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to read an essay. I keep calling this The Marines in Love, but it was published as My Son the Marine in Utne Reader, which they had picked up from Hip Mama, which is this funky West Coast journal who first started publishing me quite a while ago. It's when this came about, when this essay came about, I guess this is why that question rose up for me. It was a total surprise from this pacifist, organic growing, no running water back to the lander woman here. A surprise that my son was a Marine, but also a surprise that I wrote about it in this way. I will forever hear the word Marines as love. I know, the Marines are not about love. You might say they're about defense and protection. The Marines will tell you they're all about fighting and killing. I'm not exaggerating. The drill instructor made sure we wimpy moms standing around the visitor center on Paris Island, the ones who hadn't seen or heard our young sons for almost 100 days, understood that the Marines were not training our precious children to be journalists or mechanics or paralegals or any such thing they might have selected as their course of study. They were fighters, they were killers. That's just the way it was. His face was grim under his shaved head, shaved, he said, so that he could better slither through treacherous undergrowth and deep slime, so we had better get used to it. Curiously, I was, but from the audible shudders rippling through the crowded room, many were not. I'm not sure why I wasn't appalled, why air didn't choke in my throat, why I didn't wrestle with some impulse to insist they must have made a mistake. This child of organic carrots and whole wheat berries and peaceful resolutions was not theirs, and I must now take him home to our quirky house on a dirt road in the luscious shadow of Mount Katahdin, please. But I wasn't, and I didn't. My son is a Marine, and the Marines have taught him love, at least given him voice to the speaking of love and showing of love to this mother. I could count on one hand the number of times my youngest child has told me he loves me, until now. Now I have a clutch of letters, about 45 of them over the last 3 months, and in them I have at least 40 I love yous or I love you very muches. Even a few, I miss you moms, speckle these pages with the military insignia of what looks like an eagle sitting on a world with a grenade pin in its mouth in the corner. This is my white bread and macaroni and cheese out of the box boy, the one who's challenged me in every conceivable way, the one who stole a gun from a deserted Shin Pon camp, the one who could stare me down for days if need be to prove he had not done whatever I had seen him do, the one who has always resisted established definitions of right and wrong, black and white, acceptable and unacceptable. I could not comfortably hug or kiss him. Sometimes I have been lucky and could sneak them in when he forgot who I was and casually, almost gently, put his arm around my shoulder, caught in the telling of a story, the memory of which is now only the sound of his voice almost bursting into unknowable worlds. He is my smartest, we all acknowledge it. He taught himself to drive a standard shift in bed at night when he was 7, read 350-page books at 10, and intuitively did electronics and historical associations without knowing how. And when he went to bed, he opened up Windows and clicked on the genre of dream he wanted: adventure, nature, shoot 'em up, friends, sports, and I am sure sex. He thought everyone could. After a 35-hour bus ride, I watch him walk out of a crowd of 500 boy men on a South Carolina field. He's the one with the smooth brown face, barely able to produce stubble, the bony elbows, and toes I suspect he still can't touch. I almost didn't recognize him, standing so straight, walking so crisply, his clothes so neat and form-fitting, a man of serious intent. This is not the boy I pulled through the eye of high school with the size 40 pants and a tenuous relationship with his 28-inch waist. This is not the boy who carried in the wood more reluctantly than if it had been poison. This is not the boy who smoked a lot of dope and hung out till 4 a.m. when he lived with his father before I convinced him to come home again. This is the man who has been meritoriously promoted in boot camp, the one who now says, yes, ma'am, and no, ma'am, and holds doors, the one whose drill instructor tells me is a very motivated young man. I am tempted to say, "Ooh, this one, mine?" But I just nod, wondering how the boy on the edge chose to jump full center. I know why. He said the Marines were so tough he would not be able to choose to step outside the lines and then try to talk himself out of trouble. But I may never know how. And so now I am the mother of a Marine who says, "I love you, and I love you very much, Mom." One who thanks me for having implanted integrity and honor. Really, he actually said that. In a child who resisted it at every turn. Today, thousands of miles away, my son suits up for his nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare test while I tighten my hand-woven shawl around my shoulders and sprinkle some sunflower seeds into the crumbled tofu, licking up the warm, fruity olive oil and fresh oregano. He is my son, and I am his mom. I love him, and he loves me. And so there is nothing I can do but wish my killer well.
Oh, Annaliese, it's amazing. And how hard is it for you to write? How hard was it for you to write that essay?
They're all they're all sort of hard and not hard, because I'm not really writing an essay when I'm writing it. I'm just writing. I have no sense, Agnes, of an audience, so I'm not writing to an audience. It just starts. I don't even, this sounds crazy, but I don't even start with, oh, I'm going to write about Arik. I mean, the first time I wrote about him, I think was this. I had no intention. I just had no intention. I never thought. I have always been extraordinarily careful and aware of, as a nonfiction writer, of not paying attention to my life as fodder. So I've never really had an idea that I was going to write about my children or write about my love or write about this or write about, and it just rises up when it does. So, and it doesn't all come at once. So when you say how difficult, it's just like there's a little piece that leaks out, and then another little piece, and then it comes together in a kind of way. So, and then when you get it all together, yeah, it's kind of tough. It's kind of tough when you look at it all on a page. But as I said before, I have distance when I write these, Agnes. I'm not in the midst of, that even when that first section, when I'm writing about the middle-aged woman coming unhinged, crying all night. Well, I'm past all that at that point. And for some reason, I'm able to draw it back up and write about it as it happened. So yeah, I don't know how else to answer that. That's, it's just the way it is.
Annaliese, can I ask a question that's in the chat, and it's from Jillian Burns, and it's actually directed at both of you. Has anyone in your life ever gotten angry at you for ways you've characterized your lost ones? And if so, how have you handled that? And Jillian, if I haven't read that, I mean, if I read it correctly, but you want to add anything, feel free to unmute.
Well, I can answer it. Nobody has ever had a problem with this. Well, with this particular book, no. Of course, this particular book is like 600 pages long, so you've actually read it. And one of the reasons it's 600 pages long is because I didn't want to stop writing it, because as long as I was writing it, I had Nicholas around, right? So I but no, the answer to that question is no. Annaliese?
And it's no for me too, Agnes. I mean, the closest I ever came to anything kind of negative in terms of my work is after that Marines essay was published. I did get some hate mail that came not directly to me, but through the publishers, that because how could I love this child who was a Marine? how could I love this child who was doing awful, was out there in this world. But within my other world, no, nothing. It's never been an issue. And I think that comes, when you're talking about nonfiction, that comes, largely because you're telling the truth. I mean, I'm not making this up, even though it's it's nonfiction and you could be called on the car. But yeah, I understand what Jillian's saying. People could be that, but it's not happened with me either.
Mm-hmm. So do you have another thing you want to read? Or should we ask questions? Does anyone else have questions?
We each, I mean, if anybody has questions, we're game for questions. We love questions, by the way. We love questions. We each have 2 other sections that we can read. That is also true. So we could read those sections, Agnes, if you want, and then go to questions. What do you think?
Sure, I'll be happy to read this. Yeah, and this was what we were trying to do here, I believe, is the essence of our.
Right. Could we, this is what we gave ourselves. We gave ourselves these little assignments. This was so, by the way, I want to say publicly, this was so much fun to do with Agnes. Okay. That we would, we give it, what do we do here? What might we think of this? And so this was the thing where we gave ourselves the assignment of reading something that we thought caught the essence of our sons.
Right. So a little background to this also, which is also a kind of explanation of how Monkey came about. So the Genesis question that Annaliese asked earlier. When at the time that Nick died, he was writing a novel, and the novel was called Monkey. And after he died, I tried to find this novel, and I couldn't find it. Wasn't on his computer. I just couldn't find it. I didn't know what happened to it. I knew he'd written it or part of it, but I didn't know what happened to it. So what I decided to do was write a novel called Monkey about the search for the book and the search for the author of the book. Because in my Monkey, they both disappear. The book disappears and Nikolai, the author, disappears. And in, mid-19th century Russia, that would not have been an unusual thing for writers to just sort of disappear. It's probably still true today, unfortunately. So this section that I'm reading is, I mentioned that because it mentions the book, and the book is Monkey. In this is Margarita is a former girlfriend of Nikolai's. Then slowly it all came out. Margarita was dreaming about Nikolai Barakov. But why was she dreaming about him? Why in these dreams was she living with him in a small house, a mere cottage somewhere in Moscow? Why in these dreams was the city of Moscow so different from the actual city? And yet, why did it feel so real in the dream, with everything where it should be, though somewhat transformed? And why in these dreams were some people so familiar to her, though when she woke, she realized that she did not know them at all? Other than in your dreams, I asked her, do you know where Nikolai is? If I did, I would have told someone by now, she said in an injured voice. Everyone is looking for him. Why wouldn't I tell them? Perhaps he needs to remain hidden and you're helping him. I'm not. I don't know where he is, and to tell you the truth, I don't care. What was between us ended long ago. It's absurd. Why should I be dreaming about him now? What was between you? I asked brutishly, but I was tired of tiptoeing around the truth. This was the story I wanted to hear. Margarita, not the daughter of a revolutionary for nothing, poured us each a hefty glass of brandy. Yes, we were in love once, she began. We adored each other, but we were very young, and Nikolai already had some very bad friends, and he would go off with them. And I couldn't stand it, you see. I didn't know what he was doing with these friends, but the fact that he would never tell me made me afraid he would end up like my father, arrested, imprisoned, sent east. I told him how I felt, but he only laughed at me and told me not to worry, that nothing could hurt him, that he was invincible. So I stopped writing to him and refused to see him, and that was the end of it, I thought. Then one summer, my mother took us all to Oak Hills for a visit, and Kolya was there. I was shocked to see him, really shocked. He had put on weight, he got drunk at dinner, he was argumentative and coarse. He wasn't my Kolya at all. But one afternoon we took a walk and we talked, just the two of us, and of course he was the same sensitive, funny, smart Kolya. It was like he was hiding himself, his true soul, the one I knew and loved, under a carapace of crudeness and vulgarity, an oafish caricature of himself. But why was he doing it? Maybe because he was living with Rasnochits and the worst element of that class, many of them criminals, and he was writing about them and about how they lived, not to criticize them or patronize them, but because he enjoyed them. I know it's hard to understand, or I found it hard. He let me read his play, Wide and Crooked, he called it. He was embarrassed to show me, he said, because he had put me into the play. Not me as I am, of course, but he had created this woman who loved him, and he thought of her as me. When he told me this, Marco, I just wept. I sobbed on his shoulder like a fool, but it broke my heart. In the play, they escaped together from the dreadful things and all the horrible people in a flying machine. It makes you smile, I know, but it also is so very sad, because it's so impossible that they should escape and be happy together and not die at the end, like my father did and my mother did. She paused and emptied her glass. He always used to say that he was unstoppable. Nothing could hurt him. Who thinks that way, Marco? Only children. Was that the last you saw of him, I asked, since I had to know? No, I went to his house once in Petersburg. Really? That was brave. Foolish, I might have said, but women in love do very foolish things. We didn't stay in the house. He took me out to the city to an inn. It was very nice, the inn, and he seemed to know everyone. We had a lot to talk about. I'm sure you did. Did he happen to tell you about his book? She gave me a curious look. You know about that too? How do you know? Many people are talking about it, but I have never seen it. I've seen it, she said. I read part of it. That monstrous book, I hate it. It will destroy him. I didn't have to read much of it to see that. I begged him to burn it. Burn it? Why? Why? Oh, if I could only describe what it's like to read it. She shifted her gaze from my face to the window where the falling snow was still obscuring the view, so that it appeared to be nothing beyond the room but a white void. How can I explain it to you? I only read a few chapters of it, mind you, that night in the inn. I couldn't read more. It was breaking my heart to read it. It is more than a novel, Marco. It is a condemnation and a revelation. Don't you see, my father was punished for discussing books that called for revolution, but Nikolai has actually written such a book. How much more will they punish him? But he did not burn it, did he? She sighed and got up and walked back and forth across the room. Yes, he did, or he tried to. He built up the fire in the stove. He added wood until it blazed. He took his notebooks and began ripping out the pages and feeding them to the flames. Oh, he did it for me, you know, Marco, not for himself. He was not afraid for himself, not at all. But the pages burnt so slowly. Then the room began filling up with smoke, and it wasn't long before the landlord came banging on the door. The smell of smoke was permeating the hall. So we snatched the half-burnt pages out of the fire, and I gathered them together for him because I could see it pained him to destroy them, though he said it didn't. He said it didn't matter to him at all. But that was always the problem with Kolya, always, that he refused to admit that anything mattered to him. He told me he would drown the monkey. That was the title of the book, Monkey. He said he had this monkey on his back. He would drown it in the river. He would wrap it in chains and weigh it down and send it into the sea. Did he do it? I don't know. He may have just left it on the bench in the rain. He may have thrown himself in the river for all I know. I don't know what happened because I never heard from him.
Well, let me just say, that's brilliant. Okay. So I've read Monkey and it's 600 pages. That is true. But the writing is so fine and the dialogue so spot on that I think everybody should read Monkey. It's fiction. Fiction is so difficult. I mean, I just find it such a challenge. What if I write any fiction at all, Agnes? It's usually like a 250 word flash story, okay, which is an entirely different way. I mean, you have so many threads you've got to weave and hold on to and make function to bring everybody truthfully forward, okay, without being affected or faked or, forcing them into a spot. So it's just brilliant. So I cannot say enough about that. So thank you. Thank you for reading that section also. I love that section.
We
So,
have,
yeah.
we do have some questions, like a lot of questions. And actually, I think you tackled one in this your last comment. From Kate Berry, I'm curious if either of you are tempted to switch genres now that you have had this collaboration.
I would probably say no.
There you have it.
Largely because, I mean, it is what it is. I do find fiction really, really difficult. I once wrote something that insisted it wanted to be longer like a novel, and I just could not hang with it. It was just no. It was just vibrating no for me. So it's just, I write a fair amount lately of flash fiction, but as I said just now, it's an entirely different animal. So I don't know about you, Agnes.
I have written essays, but I wouldn't show them to anybody. They're very good. Though I did write a couple, which I would let people read, but they're essays that are, one is called On Contradiction, and it's just about, it's not the sort of personal essay that you write. It's very much more sort of cerebral and not at all personal, just very more analytical maybe, but I have this terror or this fear of exposure. I guess that's what it is, like hide behind things. I don't want to be exposed.
I think, Agnes, if I had any conscious sense that I'm exposing myself when I wrote these, I probably would not write them, because I'm also a very private person, although people often don't think that of me. I am. And but I just totally forget that other people are going to read them. And sometimes somebody will know something about me out in the world, and I'll actually say, oh, how did you know that? And it's something I've written in an essay, but I just had totally forgotten that I had written it. Yeah.
Kate Berry says, honestly, Annaliese, I find fiction impossible to contemplate, so I hear you. And the same came from Kate. Now we have some other questions. I'll go to Jennifer Comeau. And her question is, in what way do you use intuition to guide you as you write? Do you speak to your characters, Agnes? Do you do any special deep listening, Annaliese?
I don't know that I do any of that. I mean, the people of my life, I mean, this is going to sound a little strange, but even the people who are gone are very much with me. They're very much with me. And so I walk around, I carry story, I carry people. I'm never without a pen or a paper, and things kind of leak out in odd ways. They don't leak out in a big thing. So is that partly an intuitive move? I mean, I guess, but I don't ever think of it in that way.
Agnes, do you ever speak to your characters?
No, they speak to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
They speak, and I just write it down. I'm basically just take notes.
This is a good segue into Kate. She's reading the book right now.
Sorry, what?
From Kate Kearns. She's reading Monkey right now, and she's about halfway through, and she's commenting that she'll probably read it differently now after seeing the show. But she has a question for you, Agnes. I'm interested at what you said about fiction enabling you to write on scenic from many different angles. Are you in any of these characters? And do they make you see yourself in different ways that surprise you?
So okay, that's you're asking for me to reveal something.
Sorry.
So the way Monkey started was after Nick died, which was, like right before Trump was elected. So 2016. So there was, I was in mourning, and the rest of everyone I knew was in mourning too, but for a different reason. I couldn't do anything but write poems, and I'm not a poet, and I apologize to all the poets out there, because I'm not a poet, but the only thing I could write was really bad poems. But I had to write something, so that's what I did. And then when I was finished writing like 50 or 60 of these poems during the winter after he died, I started thinking that actually I could write Monkey, and I could have a character, the mother of Nikolai would have to be a poet. Because, you know, I had all these poems, and as a writer, you don't want to throw stuff away, you want to use it. So I could pick a couple of those poems that weren't really awful, and polish them up a little, pretend somebody else wrote them, and create this character who was Anastasia, who's the poet, and I made her into a very important poet, a kind of earlier version of Anna Akhmatova. And so the mother of Nikolai is the closest character to me, because I am the mother of Nikolai, obviously. But this character stops writing because she says she won't write anymore until she finds her son, and that was the opposite of me, because there I was writing like hundreds and hundreds of pages of this novel. So that's the closest character in the book. That's me.
Yeah. You know, if you don't mind, before we run out of time and before we finish up on the questions, I'd like to read my last section for the essence of Arik, largely because when you were talking about the viewpoints of, you know, you can get all those different angles on Nick. This is not the same thing, but this small section from an unpublished essay, it's written in the third person, which I don't normally do. And it's one of those things that he just kind of shows up, and there's this story and he's part of it. So and it's the real story. So it's called Boy at Home in the Night Forest. And so he's Boy. I mean, he doesn't have a name. He's not my, and then there's a mother, and that's me, but it's all in the third person. So it's just a quick little thing. But I feel that it really captures Arik. I really do. The boy can't see far in the dark, and so only listens to the rustlings through the seedy goldenrod and timothy grass as he wobbles his skateboard onto the rough-hewn maple deck. On this dirt road miles from any pavement, even of the nubby variety, the deck offers him his only ride. He breathes to a night rhythm, quiet, starry, solitary, some say dangerous, but he never thinks danger, never sees danger, has never been taught danger. Late, in preparation for a few nollies before bed, he had flipped the night light switch and flooded the pine planks, threw deep tree shadows over the wood, splattered them against the shingled wall. His palm flattened against the door's gnarled handle, his fingers not yet curled for the pull. Through the floor-to-ceiling kitchen window, he glimpsed a bear balancing on the lip of his world. Its paw prints still stand on the damp deck, unmistakable, huge enough, a real bear's prints. When his mother tells the story, she hears breath-drawn, shaky gasps, perhaps fear in the voices of the listeners. Last month's story of moose hooves pounding on the steps brought chuckles. The raccoons tearing into trash bags on the twilight porch, pressing their noses against the living room glass, indifferent to John Coltrane's saxophone or Tracy Chapman's gritty voice, make people laugh. The bear story makes them worry. Does it worry you? She asks her son. Worry? He repeats. He looks at her and shakes his head. It makes me dream. Tonight, boy and mother pull the table from the tall window, arrange their chairs tight against the curtainless glass, tight enough to sense, they hope, the bear's body heat, hear the rub of its fur against the railing, smell its entrance. They sit and wait together.
It's a beautiful essay. It's a really beautiful.
That's Arik. I mean, that's the world we lived in, and that's the life, you know, we lived. I mean, that is definitely it. So we must have more questions, people. Yes. Any?
Nicole Detremont, thank you both for tackling the subject. Truth, big subject. As a fiction writer, I find that often my characters say things that shock me. Did they really say that? But invariably, those are the utterances I most trust. Have you found that in your own writing? Really directed at Agnes, but I think it's open to both.
Did they shock me? I guess so. I guess not so much in this book, but in earlier books. When I was writing more violent books, I would be shocked that I knew the things that I knew, or thought that I knew the things that I knew, or that I could make up things that were kind of horrible. There's a torture scene in one of my books, and yeah, and then I read it now and I think, how did I do that? So yeah, I think that that is the case. But the interesting thing about writing fiction, and I actually just finished, I decided after Monkey that I really wanted to write a short book. And I I and it's a challenge to write a short book if you write long books, right? So I did finish a short book recently, and um I found that again, I didn't write any, I hadn't written anything for years, but I was thinking about this and thinking about this, and I had ideas about it. And at a certain point, it just decided to come out. And I was kidding my friends. I was saying I'm sort of like a whale. Like I have this long gestation period, like several years, and then suddenly the book comes out. And it really is like it's just they just talk to me and I just write it. It's very weird. I don't know, Annaliese, if that happens to you, but it's a very weird thing.
It happens to me in the short fiction. It definitely happens to me. The characters that show up are characters I don't expect. They are doing things I had no intention for them to do.
Yeah, it's sort of like you're a medium. So
That's
like,
right, exactly. In fiction, that's exactly what it is.
how did that happen?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Which is always a surprise.
Indeed. Always.
Well, I think that's what we love is that's what one of the things I love about writing is the surprise of it.
Exactly. You never know what's going to happen.
And you don't, even when you know nonfiction and you know what it is, you don't really know what angle you're going to take on it or what it is you're going to reveal or not reveal. I mean, you just don't know that. When I don't anyway, when I show up. And so it's all a surprise for me.
Yeah, every day is a surprise. You sit down, I sit down, and I never know what's going to happen. Interesting.
Yeah.
Beautiful questions come in from Eleanor. At least I think it's a beautiful question. I'm interested in the importance of wordlessness as a way in grief to gain distance before words can take over. Can you talk about the usefulness of no words as a kind of preparation for the courage to write? If you need to read it, it's the last question.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, we always, I mean, since we're word people, as humans, I guess I always have words around me, but I know exactly what you're talking about because words sort of flew away. When I've had lots of losses. Okay, this is one. I've had lots, and the words do leave you, and you are in a different kind of silent visual world more than an auditory world, and it's not a visual world that has words in it. I don't know how else to say that, but it's that way for a while before I figure out how to move forward. And I can't let anybody help me. So most of the time when I'm in that, nobody even knows I'm in it because I can't let you help me. I have to do it myself. So that's very similar, I think, to what she's referring to.
Right. Yeah, and I would say that yes, that there's that period of silence. And I also would say that in Monkey, and I just thought of this actually, I mean, one of the themes in Monkey is that words, that art, literature, art, poetry, the question of whether it's meaningful or not, whether it has any value, whether it works, whether it's redemptive, whether it saves people. all of this talk in the book about this book monkey that's disappeared, and everyone has an idea about what it is and how powerful it is and what it can do and what it can't do. And at a certain point in the book, near the end, when there are two chapters back to back, and they're both very short, and in one of them, one of the characters falls into this despair that nothing matters. She's just lost someone, and she feels like words are useless. They can't carry any meaning. They're not a defense against loss. And you might as well just rip everything up and throw it out, right? And then in the very next chapter, another character has the reverse feeling. So I put those two back to back because I don't have an answer to that question either. Is it valuable or not? Does it work or not? Should we do it or not? You know, is what I've spent my life writing, is that a good thing to do, or was it really stupid? I mean, you know, ultimately, I don't know. So in the book, there are those two back-to-back chapters, I think 34 and 35. If anyone's reading, when you get to 34, 35, you'll see these chapters. And so yeah, Eleanor, I totally, that's been the question. Ever since Nick died, that has been the question, like, how relevant and important is that work that we do? But, you know, it's the work we do, it's what we do, so we do it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's the end of our questions. I feel like this has been an amazing show. Any final words? Would anybody like to unmute to say anything to the authors, to either Agnes or Annaliese? If not, I feel like we could go all night and listen to readings all night, but we are over an hour.
Yeah.
We would just like to say thank you very much. This is Yvonne Maiden and David Marks, and thank you. It was really very moving and just wonderful to hear you both.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And I want to thank Littoral Books for putting Littorally Alive on this platform. And thank you very much for including me in this conversation. And for all of you for showing up and hanging out and listening to us and helping us explore what the truth is of what we do and how to do it well. I'm really grateful because honestly, you make all the difference. You make all the difference. It's why we're here. So thanks. And thanks, Agnes.
Thanks, Annaliese. It's been great. Thanks, Robert.
Yeah.
Well, you're welcome. Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you.